40,000 kiosks. This past year, they've uninstalled 500 kiosks. The revenues grew by 3% last year to about $2 billion. However, forecasted revenues for next year are going to be flat. So the board of directors wants to know how they can increase revenues by 10%.
All right, so our client is Redbox. They've installed DVD rental kiosks all over 7-Elevens, Walmart, and other grocery stores. They've already installed about 40,000. But recently, they've had to uninstall about 500 or 1% of their kiosks. The revenue for last year was up 3%, which was $2 billion. And the board of directors would like to raise the revenue 10%, which would be $200 million. Are there any other objectives I should know about?
No.
Okay, I just have one clarifying question. What were the revenue trends for the last 3 years?
Okay, good. So 3 years ago, the revenues were up 41%. 2 years ago, it was 0, it was flat. And this year it was 3%.
All right, may I have some time to think over my answer?
Sure.
So she summarized the case, verified the objective, asked her if there are any other objectives or goals. Now she's taking about 90 seconds
Let me show you
to
what
lay
I
out her
have
structure.
so far. All right, Redbox wants to raise the revenue 10% this year. We know that revenue equals price times volume. Redbox 3 years ago rose 41%, but then it fell to flat and then 3% in the last year. I want to know what happened. We need to look at their product mix. We also need to look at their distribution channels. I know that they have already installed kiosks, but have they considered online streaming? Also, we need to look at price changes and if we can bring the costs down.
Okay. Why do you want to look at costs? This is a revenue problem, not a profit problem.
Okay. Next, I want to look at the industry. What are the industry drivers and what are the growth rates and trends in the last 3 years? We also need to look at the competition. DVD rentals, who else is doing it? And online streaming, downloading, streaming. Also, piracy is an issue that we need to look into and check that out. We need to look at overall DVD sales and who are the major players and market shares. Also, are there any changes in the industry? Are there any new players, new technology, or mergers? My hypothesis is that the sales have gone flat because the industry is in decline.
Okay, good.
Where do you want me to start?
Okay, so that's a typical case start, how the cases start. And I just wanted you to get a feel for what we're going to be looking at. And we'll talk more about that. We'll see more videos and we're actually going to work through a full case together. All right, so my job today is to make sure this doesn't happen to you. Adrift after graduation, no direction home, no job. It's a miserable place to be. And in order to avoid that, you're going to have to put some time in. So students at other top MBA programs will do 30 live practice cases, 30 live practice cases. They'll also read 30 cases as well, because what that does is it builds up an archive in your mind, and you can often borrow from one case and apply it to another case. I'm a huge fan of the case journal. I go to about 45 to 50 schools every year. People come up to me and show me their case journals all the time. They're chock full of business problems, ideas, solutions. So whenever you do a case, whenever you read a case, you should write down what was the problem, what was the solution, but more importantly, what didn't I think about? And the things that you don't think about naturally will become second nature to you as you write them in this journal and flip back and forth through it. I'm sure you're going to get sooner or later a workshop on networking. And just because we're all remote doesn't mean networking changes much. It becomes even more important. Also, make sure you attend virtually the company meetings, and because oftentimes they'll take attendance at those. And I know that you guys are going to be busy, you have a lot of work to do, but this is my reading list. You should be reading the Wall Street Journal every day and not just the first page. If you're the type of student that says, you know what, I'm really not all that creative, you should be reading the McKinsey Quarterly. It's cutting edge stuff written by practitioners. If you read an article in there and you say to yourself, I would have never thought of that, then put it in your journal, and now it becomes your idea and not McKinsey's idea. And also, Business Week is always a fun read. All right, so we're going to focus mostly on consulting case interviews today because those are the toughest. If you can do the consulting interviews, you can do the marketing, the operations, the human capital interviews. And case interviews have been around over 60 years. And so recently, it's just a lot of other industries realizing how important they are and bringing them into their recruiting process. So consulting firms like people who are committed to consulting, they like low risk hires. And you're a low risk hire if you've done it before, you like it and you want to go back, or if you know exactly what you're getting into. The travel, the type of work, working as part of a team, working on projects. Their biggest fear is that they're going to spend a lot of time, effort, and money recruiting, hiring, and training you, and then you're going to bail at the end of 6 months because, you know what, this isn't what I thought it was. It's not as glamorous as I thought it was. So they want to make sure that you're committed, you know what you're getting into. They like people who are success-oriented. Well, you wouldn't be at Owen if you weren't. They like people with strong analytical skills. There's a lot of math in these questions, and you can't use a calculator. When was the last time you did long division by hand? When was the last time you multiplied two numbers together and your answer had 7 or 8 zeros at the end of it? Now, they make you do math without a calculator for 2 reasons: to see how you think and to see if you think. Because if you multiply 2 numbers together and the answer was supposed to be 320 million, and you told me it was 3.2 billion, and 3.2 billion doesn't make any sense at all, it's going to raise some eyebrows because it's showing me that you're not thinking before you speak. And if you do that in something that's as important as an interview, what are you going to do in front of a client? I can't trust you, and if I can't trust you, I'm certainly not going to hire you. So a good rule of thumb, whenever you get a math problem, take an extra second and ask yourself, does this number make sense? If it makes sense, then say it. If it doesn't, go back and recalculate it, because you know they're going to make you recalculate it anyway. And once you say it, you can't unring the bell. They like people who can articulate their thoughts under pressure. A case interview is really a role play. I'm the client, you're the consultant, here's my problem, what do I do? You have a very short period of time to listen to my problem, ask some clarifying questions, lay out your structure, do your analysis, and come up with a solution and basically sell that solution to your client. And then there's a thing called the Pittsburgh Airport test. How would I feel if I was snowed in for 9 hours at Pittsburgh Airport with you? Are you interesting, well-read, good sense of humor, a New England Patriots fan? Now you know why I had you muted, because I usually get booed when I say that. Because we're going to be working together, we're going to be traveling together, we're going to be eating all our meals together. And I want to make sure that there's some chemistry there. That's extremely important. All right, I don't care who's giving the case, whether it's Pepsi, Amazon, McKinsey, Deloitte, anyone who gives a case interview, they all look for the exact same 4 things. Structure of thought and analysis, so basically how you think, how you break things down, your confidence level, because you're going to be in front of clients. You need to have a good level of confidence because they're going to come back to you and challenge you, your communication skills, and creativity, going beyond the expected answer. If I give the same question to 4 people and they all give me the same answer, how am I supposed to pick one over the other? So I'm looking for people who either approach it differently or who can come up with some different or creative solutions to the problem. Couple things to remember. In 95% of these cases, there is no one right answer. You just need to pick one and be able to defend it. The worst thing you could do is kind of hedge your answer. They want you to make a decision. They want you to be definitive. Dialogue is more important. You need to bring the interviewer into the process. You need to make them feel like a stakeholder, feel like a client. If they feel like an interviewer the whole time, you're in trouble. So it needs to be a conversation, a dialogue. And these questions, these case questions, these problems, they're not about you. They're about the client. So you need to put yourself in the client's shoes, and everything you do, everything you say should move the case forward in the name of the client. Now, I often get, why do they give these case questions? Do they really simulate what I'm going to be doing on a typical consulting project? And as you can see here, they match up pretty well. The big difference is that a consulting project can last 3 to 9 months. A case interview can last anywhere between 20 and 40 minutes. But basically the process is the same, and we're going to see a number of examples of this. All right, types of cases. There are 2 main types of cases. The first one is what's known as a market sizing case. And sometimes they are a standalone case, and sometimes they're incorporated in a larger case. So an example would be, how many disposable baby diapers were sold in the United States last year? That's a standalone market sizing question. DuPont has developed a new material, it's biodegradable, strong, perfect for disposable diapers. How big is the disposable diaper market? Should DuPont enter this market? And if so, how? That's an example of one that's incorporated into a larger case. The first one's going to take you 3 to 4 minutes to answer. The second one's going to take you 25 to 30 minutes to answer. Now, there are a couple numbers you want to memorize whenever you're doing a market sizing question. And that way you use the same numbers all the time. You're not pulling numbers out of the air. You're used to working with them. The first one is the population of the United States, and we're going to use 320 million. We're going to assume a life expectancy of an American is 80 years, and that there's even distribution among the ages. So there's the exact same number of 2-year-olds as there are 72-year-olds. We know that that's not true, but for a case, it's a fair assumption. It also means there's a nice clean 4 million people per age group, or 80 million per generation. And the last number you want to memorize is 100 million US households. Now, if you're going to interview in other parts of the world, you need to know those numbers for the country or the region in which you're interviewing. Also, when I get a market sizing question, I try to label it in my mind. Is it a population question, a household question, a worldwide question, or who makes this stuff up kind of question? So an example of a population question would be the baby diaper question. How many disposable baby diapers were sold in the United States last year? Now, even if I walked in there and said, the population of the United States is 250 million, life expectancy is 75, it doesn't matter. They're more interested in your thought process than in whether or not your assumptions are spot on. So I don't want you to get hung up on assumptions. I want you to think about how you're going to go and answer this. And you're going to lay out your thought process first, and then you're going to fill in the blanks. But for a question like that, I'm going to say, okay, so say I did go in there and say, okay, the population's 250 million, life expectancy is 75, even distribution among the ages. That means there's 3.3 million people per age group. Children wear diapers on average from what, age 0 to 3? So that's 9.9, 10 million kids. You want to round your numbers off to make them easy. Now I need to estimate the number of those children who wear disposable diapers. And I'm going to assume 80%. Now in reality, it's probably closer to 95%, but 80 is a much easier number to work with than 95. So I'm lowballing my answer to make my numbers easier. The interviewer knows exactly what I'm doing. They're fine with it because they're more interested in your thought process. And you can bet that when they were on your side of the table, they did the exact same thing. So now we're looking at 8 million kids, hopefully changing their diapers 5 times a day on average. So that's 40 million diapers a day times 365. Now, you might not agree with everything I said, but as long as you can follow my logic, I'm fine. Okay. Household questions are often broken down by household levels. So this was in the Wall Street Journal back in, I think, 2016, 2017, and it really caught my eye because it's telling me that basically 30% of the households in the US are high income. I would have put that number at about half of that, but who's going to argue with the Wall Street Journal? So I'm looking at 30% high income, around 50% middle income, and 20% low income. All right, so you would break them down by households. Also, with a worldwide question, you're often going to get worldwide questions. Don't start with 8 billion people and try to whittle your way down. Pick one country, make some assumptions, and then extrapolate out. All right, so the case we're going to answer is how many vehicles are driving around the world? How many cars, trucks, buses are driving around the world? So this is both a worldwide case and a household case. So I'm going to make the assumption that the US makes up 10% of all the vehicles in the world. I think that number is probably high, but it's an easy number to work with and it seems to make sense. So that's why I chose it. So I need to figure out how many cars and trucks and buses are driving around the United States, and then I can extrapolate out to get the world number. So I'm breaking it down by household cars or vehicles and non-household vehicles. So high income, remember it was 30 million households. We're dealing with 100 million households, so that's about 30%. We're going to give them 3 cars each, so that's 90 million. Middle income, 50%, probably both parents work. They might have a couple teenagers driving around. We're going to give them 2 cars, that's 100 million cars. Low income, it's 20%. Part of that population lives in the city, they don't need a car. Part of the population lives outside the city, maybe they only have 1. So that's 10 million cars owned by low-income households. Next, I'm going to throw in the number of non-household vehicles. And I'm going to use the number 20 million. Where did I get 20 million? I pulled it out of the air. The number itself doesn't matter. What matters is what makes that number up. So I'm going to tell the interviewer, I'm talking about taxis, limos, delivery vans, 18-wheelers, golf carts, buses, bulldozers, police vehicles, military vehicles, anything that's a non-household vehicle. I'm going to bundle it all together and put it under that 20 million. Again, they're more interested in what makes up that 20 million than the number. That number could have been anything. So that's what you want to do. So then I'm going to total it. I get 220 million vehicles driving around the United States. So then I need to ask myself, does that number make sense? And okay, I'll say it falls into a reasonable range. If I had come up with maybe 800 million vehicles, I would look at that number and say, you know what, that number seems high to me. I'm going to use 300 million instead. You don't need to go back through your whole thought process. The interviewer knew that your number was going to be high based on the assumptions that you made. They just want to make sure that you realize that the number doesn't seem appropriate. And in a real case, I would actually draw out this chart. I would write it all out. I would fill it in as I went along so they would know what they're thinking. So if my total is 220 million vehicles driving around the United States and we make up 10% of the world's vehicles, then there are 2.2 billion vehicles driving around the planet. Now, again, I don't expect you to agree with all my assumptions. In fact, I'd be surprised if you did. But as long as you can follow my logic, I'm fine. Any questions on that? We put it in the chat. No? Okay. All right. And then there's these things called who makes this stuff up kind of question. How many jelly donuts does it take to fill the Leaning Tower of Pisa? How many slices of pizza does it take to reach the moon? How much does the 747 weigh? Now, I would be shocked if you got one of those questions from a consulting firm, but as I mentioned, more and more companies are giving case interviews, and if they don't know what they're doing or if they're not trained well, they're going to throw out these ridiculous questions. And all you can do is roll with the punches and try to approach them as logically as you can. It's a little scary to think after how many years of school your job search comes down to a question like, how many jelly donuts fit inside the Leaning Tower of Pisa? But you might get something like that. Consulting cases, you're going to get more business cases. They're going to be both oral and written. Most of them are going to be individual cases, one-on-one. And with individual cases, there are interviewer-led cases and interviewee-led cases. An interviewer-led case, which is favored by McKinsey, sounds like, here's my problem. I want you to figure out these 4 things. Maybe it's market size, break even, return on investment, whatever it is, they'll tell you what it is. Sometimes they'll give you all 4 things up front. Sometimes they'll give you them one at a time for you to fill out. But they're driving the case. An interviewee-driven case, which is favored by most other consulting firms, sound like, here's my problem, what do I do? It's very broad, it's very vague. You need to take control of that case. You need to ask the right questions, gather the information, drive the case. Now, you noticed the woman in the video before said, after she walked me through her structure, she said, where do you want me to start? Okay, that was the one mistake that she made, because with an interviewee-driven case, you're taking control. So she should have said, I want to start with the company, right? Or I want to start with the market, whatever it is, you tell them what you want to do. Then there are factor cases, and these are cases that are given by non-consulting firms. Johnson and Johnson asked, what are the 5 main factors you would look at when bringing a new drug to market? Amazon asked, what are the 5 main factors you would look at when opening up a distribution center in the Midwest? So they're looking to see what factors you came up with, but also in what order you come up with them. Do you just throw out whatever pops into your mind, or do you collect them in your mind and then prioritize them by importance? And then there's a thing called a 24-hour case. So it's usually in the final round, after you've been through the first 1 or 2 rounds, they'll call you up and say, you know what? Everybody loves you. We want you to come in for the final round. Can you come in at 4 o'clock tomorrow? You say, sure, I'll be there. And they'll say, okay, at 4 o'clock this afternoon, you're going to get an email from us which will contain a case. You have 24 hours to read the case, analyze it, come up with a solution, and prepare a presentation. And your final interview is preparing or presenting that case in front of senior management. And I think we're going to see an increase of these types of cases in the final round because we're all doing it remotely. And if one of the things you're going to have access to is case competitions. If you ever have an opportunity to do a case competition, jump on it. It's one of the best things you'll do in business school. You're going to learn extremely valuable skills, not only how to put presentations together, but working as part of a team, coming up with solutions. It's great. Jump on that. There's also team cases. 4 of you, traditionally 4 of you are sitting in a conference room, but now 4 of you are going to be remote. The interviewer comes in, gives you or emails you 2 or 3 pages of written information, and then said the 4 of you have an hour to go through this and prepare a presentation. And I'm going to sign back on in an hour, and you're going to have to present the case to 4 consultants. And the only requirement is that everybody speaks for 5 minutes. Now, traditionally, what happens, and it could be very true virtually as well, the recruiter stays in the room. They have they hear what's going on because they want to see who becomes the leader. Who does the PowerPoint, who does the finance part, who becomes the leader. So the best way to become a leader in a situation like that is to read through the 2 or 3 pages and say, okay, who's good at finance? Who's good at PowerPoint? Who's good at marketing? Whatever the case needs, and start delegating responsibility to your other members. It's a double-edged sword because if you're a finance person and someone else is a finance person, you're going to give them the finance piece. And you're basically stuck with what's left. But if the recruiter is listening, it doesn't matter because you've already gotten big points for becoming the leader. The other thing you want to make sure that you do is you decide how you're going to make up your mind as a group. Do all 4 of us have to decide, or just 3 out of 4? And you also want to be a timekeeper, because what happens is people get in discussions and arguments, and it eats up a lot of the clock, and all of a sudden you realize you have 10 minutes left, and you need to make the PowerPoint in 10 minutes, and it looks like the PowerPoint was made in 10 minutes, which isn't a good thing. Timekeeper as well. Then there are written cases. There are basically 3 types of written cases. The first one is they hand you 2 or 3 pages of written text, or email you 2 or 3 pages of text and say, okay, you have half an hour to read through this. I'm going to come back in a half an hour, and I want you to present the case to me. And oh, by the way, I want you to come up with 3 PowerPoint slides to go along with what you're going to tell them about. One of them to be a chart. Now, in the past, they wouldn't let you, there's no computer, so you have no PowerPoint, no chart wizard. Students would have to draw it by hand. This year, they may allow you to use chart and PowerPoint. The other type of written case, they'll send you 25 slides. You have 40 minutes to reduce them from 25 to 7, and then draw one more slide which has your recommendation attached to it. So it'd be 8 slides. So you're going to go from 25 to 8 slides. But I think the hardest cases are the partner cases. So you've already been through 2 or 3 cases just to get to see them. Sometimes they'll throw you an easy case. Sometimes they'll come up with a thought. Should Apple buy Netflix? You know, Apple's getting in the content. They've already spent, like $7 billion on content. Why not just buy Netflix? They have the money. What do you think? Yes or no? So then you're going to have to ask them questions. They're looking for people who can talk to power, who can ask good questions, who they're going to look at how you break things down, what analysis is. And then at the end, you're going to have to decide, should Apple buy Netflix, yes or no? And hold on to your hat, because there's a very good chance that when you say, yes, they should buy it, they're gonna look you right in the eye and say, let me tell you why you're wrong. If you had said, no, they shouldn't buy it, they're gonna look you right in the eye and say, let me tell you why you're wrong. They have arguments for both sides. So they want to see if you can defend your answer without getting defensive, make a persuasive argument while keeping your confidence level high. And you're going to hear me say that a couple times. But I think the toughest partner case, partner calls you into her office and she says to you, last night I made a presentation to a client. This was the problem. This was the solution. I presented it in 7 slides. What's on my slides and in what order? And you say, okay, well, it was an entering a new market question. I'm sure you talked about this. That's right, I did, but that was slide number 3. Why did you put it first? And I don't want to say she'll badger you, but she'll badger you until you get all the information on the slides and in the right order. Does it sound like fun yet? Good. All right. That's what
Mark, I have a question from Rachel.
Okay.
What if you don't end up being the leader in the group? What strategies can you take to stand out?
Okay. So if you're not the leader, that's fine. You're just going to have to contribute more, right? You're going to have to. The one thing you want to make sure you do is that you don't throw shade on anybody. You build on what other people say, you ask good questions, and then you do your job really well. And when it comes for your 5 minutes, you present your part of the piece professionally. And I'll let you in on a little secret. The best people should go first and last in this. All right, so you want a strong beginning, you want a strong ending. And also, one of the other things you can throw out is you're going to say, okay, at the end, I know we're going to get grilled, so we need to decide who covers what area, who answers what question. And so you can make up a lot of those points just by doing your job really well and, giving good answers. All right, good question. This is my first question break. Any other questions, Courtney?
Nope, you're good. Oh, wait, will we be interviewing in groups of other Owen students or other candidates?
Both. Sometimes they'll do group interviews, first rounds, with people from your school. You're most likely to be, for the later rounds, you're most likely to be interviewing with students from other schools, because they want to see whether or not you can communicate and you can work together with someone that you don't know, right? Because you're going to be thrown together on teams, on consulting engagements, and they want to make sure that you can work through it and work with other people. Another great question. All right, the interview itself. All right, the first 5 steps, they give you the question, like I gave the woman. The first thing you do is you summarize the question back. You streamline it. You don't repeat it word for word. If there are any numbers involved, you want to bring up the numbers because we don't know whether or not they're going to be important later on. If there are any numbers that are related to each other, you want to quantify them as a percentage. So if I said to you, word leaked out and our stock went from $15 to $18 a share, when you summarize that back to me, you're going to say the stock went up 20%, not $3. $3 is new information, but it's not helpful information because I don't know what $3 means, but I know what 20% means. Consultants like to put things into perspective, which is why they always do 2 things. They always quantify related numbers as percentages, and they always ask for trends. And if you don't do those 2 things automatically yet, you need to start from this day on. The other reason why you want to summarize the case, now some of these cases are pretty short. How do we increase sales at the campus bookstore? But others are long and involved, and there's a ton of information coming at you like a fire hose. And you're writing it down as fast as you can, but you may not pick up all that information. So when you summarize it back to them, they may say, you know what? I said 40%, not 50%, and you forgot this. So they make sure the 2 of you are on the same page. The final reason to summarize it is that it fills the gap of silence between the end of their question and the beginning of your answer. Because if they give you a question and you sit there and you look up at the ceiling or out the window thinking for 30 or 40 seconds, it seems like a lifetime. And the awkward clock starts ticking. And basically you're dead in the water. If you summarize the case, you got a little momentum going, then you verify the objective because the objective often drives the whole case. And oftentimes there's a secondary objective that they don't tell you about that's going to pop up halfway through the case and bite you. So you always want to say, besides increasing sales or whatever the case was about, are there any other objectives or goals I should be concerned with? If there are, they'll tell you. If there's not, you don't have to worry about it. But if there are and you don't ask, they're going to have to feed you that information later on. And if they have to feed it to you, you're going to lose some points. The third one is asking clarifying questions. Now, these are only questions to ask when you don't understand something or if you need additional information in order to lay out your structure. So if they give you industry jargon, slang, a string of initials, and you don't know what they stand for, ask. You don't get any points taken off. If you have an entering the new market question, a good clarifying question would be, why do they want to enter this market? If you have a profit and loss question, a good clarifying question is, are our competitors' profits down as well? Because I want to know, is this our problem or is this an industry-wide problem? And you can ask anywhere from 1 to maybe 4 clarifying questions at the most. You don't want to pepper them with a lot of questions because that makes them feel like you don't know where you're going and you're just trying to buy time. And you want to make sure that some of your questions don't belong in the structure, which is the fourth step, is laying out your structure. So basically a structure is, given the limited information that they give you up front, what would you look at, what would you analyze, and in what order? And we're going to spend a lot of time on structures in just a few minutes. The fifth step is stating a hypothesis. Okay, you heard the woman, Noe, on the screen state her hypothesis after she walked me through her structure. Now, they're going to look for you to state an initial hypothesis, but you're not going to have any information. So no one expects your initial hypothesis to be correct. Basically, you're taking an idea, you're throwing it against the wall to see if it sticks. So if it doesn't stick, then we'll come up with another one later. So an example would be, if it's a profit and loss question, you can just simply say, my hypothesis is, or my thoughts are, our profits have fallen because our costs have risen. Now, we may decide whether, as we work through the case, we may find out whether that's true or not. If it's not true, we'll come up with another one once we get more information. Think of stating a hypothesis as icing on the cake. They love it when you do it. If you forget to do it, it's not the end of the world. But these interviews are so competitive that you can't forget to do it. So what I tell my students to do is, when you're doing your 30 practice cases, on the first page of notes, right in the middle of the page, write the letter H. So when you're writing out your notes, you're going to write over this letter H, and you're going to remember to state a hypothesis. And if you do that during your practice cases, it's going to become second nature to you when you get into the real interview. And the reason why they like it is that's how they think. You know, they'll go into an engagement, they don't know what the problem is. It could take them up to 5 days to come up with a hypothesis. And chances are they're going to get the first 2 or 3 wrong. You have 5 minutes to come up with a hypothesis. So that's why no one expects it to be right. They just want to make sure that you're thinking this way. And we'll see more examples of that in a few minutes. All right, I want to take a second and talk about case notes. They like it when you hold your notes landscape and divide it into 1/3, 2/3 on the left-hand side. This is where you write down all the information that they give you. If you remember the woman's notes from the initial case start, you saw that her notes were on, all the information they gave her was on the left-hand side. Any clarifying questions she had, she wrote on the left-hand side as well. She put the objective across the top, front and center, so she never lost sight of the objective. And then you draw out your structure. And now, you know, they're not going to normally, well, let me go down here. So you're going to want to only write on one side of the page, so you're not flipping back and forth. And so you can lay out your notes, lay them out, and you can see the whole case at a glance. Some of these cases, you may have 1 or 2 pages of notes. Other cases, you could have 4 or 5 pages of notes. All right, so you want to number the pages so you know what order they came in. You want to spread them out in front of you and only write on one side. And you want to get in a habit of drawing your notes. And I'm talking about decision trees, arrows, graphs, flowcharts, that sort of thing. And you want to do it for 3 reasons. The first reason, if you ever sat down with a consultant, there's a good chance that they drew out their notes. It's how they think, it's how they want you to start to think. Second reason, if you're doing it face to face, when they're not looking you in the eye, they're looking at what you're writing down because they know what you should be writing down, and they're trying to follow your thought process upside down. And if you write in pencil and you write small, it's gonna be hard for them to read and they're gonna get frustrated. But the real reason why you want to draw out your notes is so then you can turn your page towards them and walk them through the process, your thought process, like the woman did on the screen. Now, virtually, you're not going to be able to do that. They may ask you to hold up your notes to the screen. They may ask you at the end of the case to take a picture of them and email them to them instantly so they can look at it. They're going to put it in your file. It's one more data point that they look at. What did you write down? How did you write it? How well organized was it? How did you do your math? And can they read your handwriting? Okay. A lot of students will use a separate sheet of paper for their math. And at the end of the case, they're going to either ask you to summarize the case or make a recommendation. So as you move through the case, you want to star the most important points. You know, circle it, star it, underline it, so it jumps off the page at you. I've seen people rifle through 4 or 5 pages of notes trying to remember what was important and where they wrote it down, and they didn't look very professional doing it. So if they ask you to summarize the case, you don't get 20 or 30 seconds to go back through your notes. You need to summarize it immediately. So a good summary is between 30 and 90 seconds. It is not a rehash of everything we talked about. It's a little bit of the backstory and then 2 or 3 key things that you want me to remember. If they ask you for a recommendation, you can say, I just want to take a moment and do my final analysis. And you can get up to maybe a minute, minute and a half to 2 minutes to do your final analysis and lay out your recommendation. Now, there will be times when they say, the CEO just walked in, give her your recommendation, and you need to do it off the top of your head, much like you would a summary. But if you have the time, you want your recommendation to look something like this, okay? You know that when a consultant gives a recommendation to a client, they have a PowerPoint behind them. This is your PowerPoint. You're going to put your recommendation on a separate sheet of paper and you're going to try to make it visual. So you can either hold it up, you can email it to them, or if you're face-to-face, you can turn it around and walk them through it. So here I say, no, they shouldn't buy the equipment. I give 3 reasons why. I also talk about the risks. Okay, so one risk is that technology will change. The likelihood of that is about 60%, but the severity of that is much higher. It's about 90%. So so we can either mitigate that by outsourcing it or by leasing the equipment. So the L stands for the likelihood, the severity, or the S stands for severity. Now, even if they say to you, the CEO just walked in, when you're talking to them about risks, you need to tell them the likelihood that the risk is going to happen, and prioritize them the risk as well. So, there's a high possibility that this risk will take place, or kind of a low possibility. Then with next steps, you want to do short term, and you also want to do long term. Most students will only do short term, but if you do long term, it gives you a longer period of time to look at, and it also allows you to be more creative in it. The final things about a recommendation is that you need to sell it. You need to close the deal. If I don't buy your recommendation, the chances of you moving on to the next round are a lot less. And there's also the possibility that they're going to come back to you and say, let me tell you why you're wrong. And again, you need to defend your answer without getting defensive, make a persuasive argument while keeping that confidence level high. Okay. These are the cases that you're most likely to get. There are going to be combinations of these, and there are going to be other types of cases that don't fit into any of these categories. The most popular one is profit and loss, followed by entering a new market. Could be a new product, a new business, maybe a merger or an acquisition. Pricing, sometimes it's a standalone, sometimes it's incorporated into a larger case. Growth was like the red box case. And then there's one basically called strategy by numbers. So they'll say, here's an idea. Give me the pros and cons of this idea. So you lay out the pros and cons, and then they take a bunch of numbers, they dump them on the desk. You need to go through them, organize them, and run them and come up with an answer. But whatever you do, don't base your recommendations solely on the numbers. Look at everything, analyze everything. Go back over all the pros, the cons, any discussion that we had. Because if you come to me and say, I'm going to go with option B because it's cheaper and that's the only thing you looked at, you're out. They want to make sure that you analyze everything. All right, so we're going to talk about structures because they're important. There are a couple structures that we'll see that are kind of carved in sand, but most of these cases, you're going to have to handcraft a structure based on the question. And I want you to think like an entrepreneur. I want you to think, what would I need to look at in order to answer this question? And you're going to be able to hopefully ask the right questions and turn it into a well-structured conversation. All right, so let me go previous. All right, you're going to get a lot of questions that ask you to analyze the client. Look at this list, memorize this list, rattle it off in your sleeps. There's nothing on there that you don't already know except maybe WCS, which stands for what constitutes success to the client. Okay, what kind of metrics are we looking at? What's important to them? If it's a profit and loss case, the objective is to increase profits. What constitutes success to them might be increasing profits by 8%. And you need to know that because they're going to throw numbers at you and you're going to have to figure out what 8% represents. So memorize this list. There's nothing on there, again, that you don't already know. If you can memorize the list along with this list for marketing, you're going to go into the interview, your confidence is going to be higher, you're going to be able to lay out your structure more quickly because you're not going to have to stop and think about what do I need to know about the market, because you already know what you need to know about the market. So you'll be able to write it down more quickly, and you're not going to miss anything big. And again, there's nothing on here that you don't already know. So take the time to memorize those two lists. Okay? So this is my structure up top. That's my structure or profit and loss case. Inside the parentheses tells us what's going on inside the company. But I want to look at external factors first because I want to know, is this our problem or an industry-wide problem? So the E stands for external factors, which could be the economy or it could be the environment. So you could probably tell me 12 things going on in the economy today. That's great, but it's not going to be helpful. I want 2 or 3 things going on in the economy that are important to the company inside the parentheses. So if we're talking about a retailer, maybe it's consumer confidence, maybe it's disposable income, maybe it's the price of gas. If it's the environment, okay, so I think it was 2017, Houston got devastated by a hurricane, right? McDonald's called up Wall Street and said, we're not going to make our numbers this quarter because 35 of our restaurants were either destroyed or damaged. CarMax called up Wall Street and said, our numbers are through the roof because the day of the hurricane, they were driving every possible car they had down to Houston because they knew cars were going to be destroyed. Cars are insured, people need a car, and they want choice. So they drove as many cars down there, and it turned out that over 50,000 cars were destroyed in that hurricane. And CarMax was right there. So environment can be good, it can be bad. The takeaway is that we don't live in a vacuum, so you shouldn't do your cases in a vacuum. You want to look at external factors. They play a role. Now, the M stands for the market or the industry. Now, no one expects you to know what's going on in all these different industries. That would be impossible. But as long as you know what kind of questions you need to ask to learn about an industry, then it shouldn't matter. And what kind of questions are you going to ask? The ones that you memorize, the ones that you're rattling off in your sleep. Again, you're not going to miss anything big. You may not use all these. You may add one or two to the list, but you're going to get a lot of good information. Then we go inside the parentheses and we look at the company. And we're going to ask questions about the company. What are you going to ask? The questions that you memorize. Now, there are two on here that I always ask. The first one is, unless they give me this information, the first one is the first one. What are the profits and revenues for the last 3 years? That tells me how big a company is and how well they're doing. Because in a lot of these cases, the company's made up. It's company XYZ or company ABC. We don't know how big they are. Even if the case is about Pepsi, we don't know how big they are. We don't know how they're doing, right? Sugary drinks are down, but they have a lot of other products. So this put things into perspective. The other one I always ask is what constitutes success? Now that could be a clarifying question or it could be part of your structure. Then if it's a profit and loss case, I'm certainly going to know what are the major revenue streams and how have they changed over time? What are the major costs, both fixed and variable, and how have they changed over time? And depending on the case, I might ask about brand or product mix, whatever. But again, if you memorize these, then you're in pretty good shape. All right, entering a new market. Now, one of the things that you need to think about when you lay out your structure is that it needs to be what's called MECE, M-E-C-E. And MECE stands for mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. Mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. It's a consulting term that gets kicked around, and all it means is that when you lay out your structure, there shouldn't be any overlap. So here, for a structure for entering a new market, we're going to analyze the client, we're going to analyze the new market, and then we're going to look at how best to enter the market. Each one of those are mutually exclusive of each other, but collectively exhaustive of everything we need to look at in order to solve this case. Now, one mistake MBAs often make is when they get an entering a new market case, they always analyze the new market first because they want to see whether or not it's worth it. I can understand that, but I think it's a mistake. I think you need to understand the client first before you can look at the market and know whether or not it's a market they should enter. How can you know what's good for the client if you don't know anything about the client first? So I always analyze the client, then the market, and then how best to enter the market. And you can just do, what are the pros and cons of each one of those. Pricing. These are 5 things to look at when you get a pricing case. The first one is company objective or company strategy. Let's take the tablet market for a second. Apple came out with the iPad. They were first to market, beautiful piece of technology, but it was pricey. We know Apple likes big margins. Samsung came out with the Galaxy, another beautiful piece of technology. Their price was lower, their margins were thinner, they were going for market share. The Amazon Kindle Fire came out, and they priced it for what it cost them to manufacture. Because their goal was to get as many of those out there as possible, because they're going to make more money on the ancillary products, the songs, the movies, the books, the Prime accounts, than they would ever make off the sale of a single device. So 3 very different objectives for basically the same product, right? So you want to know what's the objective. Then you can look at competitive analysis. What else is out there? What do they charge? Are there any substitutions? What do they cost? And make sure you take into consideration competitive response. So if we come out at a certain price, how are competitors going to respond? Then there's cost-based pricing. Basically, we add up all the costs and stick a margin on top. That's what Apple does. Usually not a very good way to price anything, because if you misjudge the market, you're going to have to start discounting your price and your margins are going to get thinner. But you need to know product or service is going to cost in order to come up with a price. I've had a number of students give me a price before they knew what the costs were. They might as well gotten up and walked out right then and there. There's no way to come back from that. You need to know what the costs are before you come up with the price. Then there's price-based costing. What is the market willing to pay? Okay, that book we were talking about before, Case in Point 11, it cost me $2 to print up. I sell it for $32. Why? Well, because I'm a bastard. I know I can get it. Right? My competition's just as expensive, and quite frankly, their book's not half as good. And baby needs a new pair of shoes, so I need to crank that price. If I put 100% margin on it, that's 100% margin's great, but I'd leave a lot of money on the table. So it's whatever the market is willing to pay. And then of course you want to take supply and demand into consideration as well. Growth, these are just 5 ways to grow the company: increasing distribution channels, increasing and diversifying product mix, marketing campaign, acquiring a competitor, and create seasonal balance. All right. I threw this up here because one of the big changes we've seen over the last couple of years, you're going to get a lot of graphs during your case. Anywhere from 1 to 3 graphs. They may send them to you right away, or they may send them to you while things are happening. You need to look at them, analyze them, and then extract what's important and then apply it to your answer. There's 11 different graphs used in consulting and case interviewing, so you need to be aware of the different graphs and how to read them quickly. All right. Go back. So I know we just went through a lot. Any questions? Courtney, we got any questions? People just put them in the chat.
There were a few that came up, but I didn't stop you right when they came in. So add context, Emma and Gerardo, if needed. In team-based cases, is it possible for all candidates to advance in the interview process if they perform well?
It's possible, but it's very unlikely. Usually even though you present as a team, you're judged individually. So they may bring one or two of you back. It's very unusual for the whole team to come back.
And Emma said, even in a market sizing case, do you need a hypothesis?
No.
And the final one, what if you have more than one hypothesis?
Well, only one at a time. So you'll have your initial hypothesis. If we go through it and determine that it was wrong, no big deal, we'll state another one. So like in that one example I used, with the profit and loss, and I said, my thoughts are our profits have dropped because our costs have risen. And we found out that wasn't the case, but we did find out that there are more players in the industry. You can certainly just state my new hypothesis is that our profits have fallen because of a new entrance into the market. And that's all you need to do.
Okay.
The other thing about a hypothesis, it's short. It's like one sentence. And if it's tied into kind of a yes/no question, your hypothesis should be, my hypothesis should be, yes, they should enter the market because we have great brand recognition and this market is driven by brand. Something as simple as that. I get people who give me a paragraph on a hypothesis and you just need one short sentence to do it.
Let's see. Do you need a hypothesis for an interviewer-led case?
It never hurts, but it's not as big a deal as it would be for an interviewee-driven case. You definitely need one for an interview-driven case, but for an interviewer-driven, my thought is that you'll never get penalized for laying out a hypothesis, but you might get penalized for not stating a hypothesis. I'll leave it at that.
And I think the last one is it a good idea to use sophisticated concepts, perhaps of economics or finance, in creating your framework, or should we tend to stick to basic concepts to keep things simple?
I would keep things simple unless this concept that you're thinking about really addresses the case well. I wouldn't do it to try to impress the interviewer. These guys and gals are pretty smart, but if it fits naturally, and then I would use it. They want to see how you think. So if you say, I'm going to use Michael Porter's 5 forces, they're likely to say, I don't know, I don't want to know what Michael Porter thinks. I want to know what you think. So they'd rather have you explain things in your own terms than to either use industry jargon and get it wrong or to throw out a concept that's kind of a cookie cutter concept. So I'd rather have you do it on whatever you think and keep it simple. These are all great questions.
That is the last question I have right now.
All right, now the fun starts. I'm tired of talking. You guys are going to do all the work now. So you need a piece of paper, and you want to do it on a piece of paper because that's how you're going to be doing these cases in real life, whether it's via Zoom or in person. So we're going to do, oh, where did I go? Am I going the wrong way? I'm going the wrong way. Hold on, so. we're going to go through 3 case starts. They're going to get harder as we go along. I'm going to give you the case start. I'm going to give you 90 seconds to lay out your structure. And just take a shot at it. See how it feels. And they're fun. Have fun with this. No one's going to see it besides you. In the case start section, I'm going to give you a case. You're going to pause the video, take 90 seconds to lay out your structure, and then compare it to the one on file. Remember, there's no right or wrong answer. You just want to see how you compare and whether you covered everything that was important. The major office supply store saw its profits drop by 20%. We want to know what's going on and how to fix it. Pause the video, take 90 seconds to lay out your structure, and then compare it to the students. All right, so basically Staples profits have dropped by 20%. We want to know what's going on and how to fix it. You got 90 seconds. Take a shot at it. If you want to throw in a hypothesis, that's fine too. Okay, let's see what you came up with.
I'd like to take a look at external factors first because I want to know, is this our problem or an industry-wide problem? I know that the economy is still weak and that people have less disposable income, but it seems like everyone is starting their own business, which should mean big sales for office supply stores, but we'll see. I'd like to know the size of the market, the growth rate, and what trends have been for the last 3 years. I'd like to know whether the competition is having the same problem. Have their profits fallen by 20%? Has their market share fallen or remained the same? Have there been any changes in the industry? Are players exiting the market, maybe a merger, or has some sort of substitution come on the scene? I'd also like to take a peek at the company. You said they were a major office supply store. Are they the #1? How strong is their brand nationally? And what's their consumer segmentation? Next, I'd like to look at the revenue streams. What are the major revenue streams? Has there been a change in the revenue mix? Are there new products? Have the distribution channels changed? I know that fewer people are going to malls and retail outlets. And finally, I'd like to look at the costs. What are the major costs and have there been any changes? Do any costs seem out of line? Are they closing or opening new stores? My hypothesis is that our profits have fallen because our costs have risen and our distribution channel mix has not adjusted to customer shopping patterns.
Okay, so just like yours. This is probably one of the easiest cases you're ever going to get. Straightforward profit and loss case. And you notice she wasn't looking you in the eye the whole time. She was looking down at her page, and that's fine. Because every once in a while I'll have a student who is taking notes and looking me in the eye where they take notes, and it kind of creeps me out. So it's you know, you can look up, you can look down. She had just written that, so she's walking me through it. All right, we're going to do another one, and we're going to take it up a notch. Okay, since you already have one under your belt, we're going to take it up a notch. Now, the woman in this is going to ask a lot more questions than Noe did. And well, I'll let you see. Yep.
Our client is a $700 million dog food company. The company is considering offering a new product that allows its customers to test their dogs for genetic diseases and also reveal the dog's breeding history. The CEO needs our help to decide if and how he should enter the US market.
Okay, so a pet food company is considering producing a genetic test for dogs to determine if their dogs have a predisposition to various diseases. It can also tell the dog's breeding history, so sort of a 23andMe for dogs.
Right.
The CEO wants our help determining if and how it should enter the US market. Are there any other goals I should be concerned with?
Yes, he wants us to come up with a pricing strategy.
Okay. I have a few clarifying questions. Why do they want to enter this market?
Basically to increase their revenues, possibly get some new customers and build stronger relationships with the customers they already have.
Okay. Is the genetic test patented?
No.
Are there any other companies offering the same service?
There are two major companies, two major players making up about 75% of the market. The remaining 25% are smaller players, kind of home testing, not at the same level.
And what constitutes success to the client?
An overall increase of 10% revenues to the company.
So around $70 million.
Exactly.
Can I take a moment to lay out my thoughts?
Yes. Pause the video, take 90 seconds to lay out your picture, and then compare it to the students.
All right, another 90 seconds. Okay, let's see how you did.
Okay. I want to break this down into internal and external and how best to enter the market. So internally, I'd like to know current customer base and expected new customers, such as breeders and animal shelters, distribution channels, current and new, maybe veterinarians, product mix, or what do we sell now? How will our genetic product be different from others? Does the client have the capability to do this, or will they have to build a lab? We need to think about the costs of producing the test, like swabs of the dog's saliva, running the test, setup costs, lab costs, new hires, such as geneticists, and the time to market. Also, we need to look at pricing options. Do you charge one price to learn the breeding history and another to the predispositions to disease? And how much we should charge for each? That the company's strategy is increased rates. Should this come at the expense of profits?
Okay.
Competitive analysis, cost-based, price-based costing. How long will it take us to break even? And also, can this lead to other products or services? And then I'd like to know the size of the market, growth rates and trends. This is a one-off, so you only do it once. In the long run, is the market going to shrink? What are the typical margins in this industry? Players and their market share, who are they? Is this all that they do? Industry distribution channels, risks, barriers to entry, and also competitive response. And then how best to enter the market. Do we grow organically? Do we acquire a lab? Do we outsource? Or can we go into strategic partnerships? We need to look at the pros and cons of each and do a cost-benefit analysis. If we decide not to enter, what are some possible alternative ideas to increase revenues by $70 million? So my hypothesis is that the company should enter the market since they have far-reaching distribution channels.
Good.
Typical margins in this industry.
Okay, so that was an entering a new market case. It had a pricing component to it as well, and a revenue component. So there was a lot going on there. So she broke it down into internal, external, which a lot of students do, which is fine. They find that natural. But it had basically all the same components that my entering the new market buckets had it as well. She made one comment that I found fascinating, which was, this is a one-off, right? You're only going to do it for your dog once, so in the long run, is the market going to shrink? And that was something that separated her from all the other students who did this case. She also, her hypothesis was, yes, we should do it because they have expanded distribution channels. Well, how did she know that? Well, we're a $700 million dog food company. That's a lot of dog food. So she's thinking, we have big distribution channels. She also asked, who are the major players and what else do they do? Who are our competitors? So she's thinking that, okay, we have a strong brand with consumers, so we have a competitive advantage, particularly if our competitors are medical labs. But if we're going up against Purina or another large dog food company, or even a place like Chewy's.com, then we've lost our competitive advantage. And also, she said, if we decide not to do it, we need to come up with an alternative idea to hit that 70 million. Now, what was interesting about this case when I gave it live is students would go through this whole thing, and it would turn out that this new project would only bring in $50 million, not 70 million. So then what do? Do we throw the baby out with the bathwater and start all over? Or do you say, okay, we'll take 50 from here and then we'll come up with something new to bring the additional 20 million in? And different students had, different ideas. All right, so questions on this case. This was much tougher. This is a solid second round case. And, you know, I don't think you're going to get anything that's going to be much harder than this, but you might.
Is it bad to say our versus the client?
No, in fact, I would encourage you to use the word we and our. We're all in this together.
When answering the question, if we have industry experience, should we bring it up when answering?
Yes. Well, a couple of things going on. So one, if they looked at your resume and saw that you worked for Purina or Chewy.com or something in the pet industry, then they're unlikely to give you a case that has anything to do with your background, because they're not there to measure your industry knowledge. They're there to see how you think. So if they see something like that on your resume, they'll just pick another case. If for some reason you do have some industry knowledge, you can use some of it, but you know, I wouldn't dominate it with industry knowledge. So I gave this case on headphones, and the first student I gave it to was an MBA who used to work for Bose, right? And I didn't see their resume. So he's asking me all these questions about headphones, which I hadn't thought about or I didn't know the answer to. And an interviewer will never say to you, I don't know. They'll never say, I don't know the answer. What they'll say is, it's not relevant, right? So this guy's asking me these questions. I'm going, not relevant, not relevant, not relevant. But I'm writing all this information down. So next time I gave the case, I threw that information in there. It said, oh, you didn't know this. Huh. And so I don't know if that answers your question or not, but there you go. Other questions? These are all good questions.
In cases where not enough revenue was raised, should we try and recommend ways to raise the other 20 million, or just tell the interviewer another 20 million will have to be raised?
No, you want to come up with ways to raise the other 20 million. They don't have to be in great detail. And the other thing is, if you get a question, sometimes the answer is no, we shouldn't do this. But if the answer is no, then you want to come up with an alternative idea to kind of keep us in the game. Consultants are always looking for more work. So even if when you're giving your recommendation and you're laying out next steps, you can always add the tagline, and we can help you with that, right? And the interviewers will know that you know what's going on, that you're always looking for more work. And quite frankly, your solution, your recommendation is more likely to get implemented and implemented successfully if you're there to help them implement it. And so yes.
How do you go about cases where you have limited knowledge on, say, insurance, biotech, etc.?
Well, by asking the questions that you memorized about the market. So if you memorize those, they'll be enough to get you to cover most things. And they're going to they're not going to expect you to know these little niche things about the insurance industry. I had one of my students, she was an undergrad, she got a job at McKinsey. She called me up like 2 weeks into her training was over. She was just assigned her first case. She called me up in tears because she said, my first case is with the insurance industry. Can you imagine anything more boring than an insurance case? And it turned out to be her best experience, because the insurance industry does all these things that other industries don't do but should do. So then when she got cases in other industries, she pulled out her knowledge about the insurance industry and said, if you thought about, here's some risks that we're looking at if you thought about this. And she looked like a superstar, and she ended up becoming a partner at Parthenon. So memorizing that list will allow you to ask the right questions about an industry.
And I think we covered, let me make sure. Yep, covered the questions at this point.
Okay. If I knew you guys were going to ask such great questions, I would have recorded this, but I didn't think to do that. So, all right, some more fun here. We're going to go through a case together. Oh, I forgot one more case start. And this one doesn't fit into any category. So our first category was basically profit and loss. Our second one was both a pricing and entering a new market. This doesn't fit into any category. You'll have fun with this.
Our client is Netflix. The company has hired us to develop a game plan as to how and when it should shutter its DVD by mail program.
Besides coming up with this game plan, are there any other objectives I should be looking into?
No.
Well, I have two clarifying questions to start. First, why is Netflix trying to shut down their service?
Why do you think?
Off the top of my head, I would think one, it's probably not profitable. Perhaps they see the DVD technology as obsolete with the rise of online streaming. And then maybe they just want to move their resources to other areas.
Okay, all good reasons. Then why do you think they haven't shut it down yet?
Probably because it's still profitable.
Okay, good. What was your other clarifying question?
Is there an event or a number that Netflix is looking for that would trigger the shutdown?
It wants to shut it down while it's still profitable.
Okay, can I just get a second to write my thoughts?
Sure.
Thanks.
All right, your final 90
Pause
seconds.
the video, take 90 seconds to lay out your structure, and then compare it to the students.
Okay, let's see how you did.
Okay, so here's something I came up with. I would probably work this problem into three buckets. I would label them current, how, and when, as in what's the current state of their service, how they're going to exit, and when. So for the current, I would want to look at their current members, the number of members to be exact. I'd also want to take a look at trends in membership, revenue, profits, going back, I'd say the last 3 years at least. And I'd also want to look at the margins as well. For the how, first I want to look at their customers. I would ask, is this a shrinking customer base? Where are these customers going to go? Can we convert them to streaming? How can we make up the lost revenue from the program? Second, I want to look at staff. Something like this would take a hit to the staff. So can we transfer or reassign these workers to other areas? How many workers would be laid off, and what would the cost be in terms of not only dollars, but also company morale? Also the warehouses. What's Netflix going to do with these warehouses? Are they going to sell them, rent them, repurpose them, hold on to them, essentially land bank them? And then once that's figured out, the DVDs inside, we need to figure out what to do with them. Are we going to sell them? Are we going to destroy them? Are we going to give them away to maybe a library or charity, or maybe even customers, and particularly faithful? And then finally, barriers to exit, things like non-transferable fixed assets, or the basic emotion that these DVDs are what built the house of Netflix. It's where they started. So I would assume that someone like Mr. Hastings would have somewhat of an emotional attachment to these DVDs. And then finally, I would look at the when of it all. When does revenue equal cost? Can we calculate the time when it will no longer be profitable? And if resources need to be allocated to fund other projects or develop new content. That's where I would start. Like Mr. Hastings would have somewhat of a library or charity, or maybe even customers who have been.
Okay, so you can see his structure is MECE. It's straightforward, it's rocket science, but it covers just about everything. One of the things that he brought up that I loved, that separated him from everyone else, is he was talking about barriers to exit, and he brought up basic emotion as a barrier to exit. This is the product that built the house of Netflix. Is Reed Hastings going to hesitate to pull the plug on this because he has an emotional tie to it? Worth talking about, absolutely. Questions on this one?
In a case like this, will they ask you for a recommendation answering the question of how and when, or are they only looking for your approach?
They're looking for both. You're going to have to give them a recommendation. You would get, this case is actually in the book, and it's a great case to read. I won't go, there's charts that you can look at and all that. I don't want to go into it yet because I'm excited about this next case we're going to participate in. So any other questions about?
The final is, I didn't hear him state a hypothesis.
Good, he didn't state a hypothesis. I would have liked to have seen him do it. Maybe he lost 1 or 2 points for not doing it, but he gained a lot more points by that barriers to exit thing. And he ended up stating one later on, but I always like it right after you walk me through your structure.
Does it make sense to present a profitability framework under when?
All right, so that's a great question. So one of the big complaints you'll hear interviewers say is that people try to jam frameworks or structures into every case. And sometimes, they don't fit, they don't belong. So in a case like this, he has some, revenues and profits down there. He's looking at the margins. He's looking at trends. The profit and loss formula here really doesn't, it's not the best thing to put in. And don't try to force it. Sometimes it's just pros and cons. Sometimes they'll tell you what they want. You really need to kind of listen very carefully to what they're asking for. All right, I want to run through this. I'm going to run through it. I'm going to ask you to contribute a couple things. We might go a few minutes over, but not too bad. All right, so our client is Cal Brothers Premium Ice Cream. Cal Brothers is looking to increase the revenues from 200 million to 250 million. How do we do it? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to summarize the case, verify the objective, ask if there's any other objectives or goals. All right. So because this case is so short, you're going to sound like an idiot if you say, well, let me, rephrase it. So you can just say, besides increasing revenues by 25%. So they did that on the fly. Remember earlier I talked about if there's any numbers that are related to each other, you want to quantify them as a percentage. Are there any other objectives we need to be concerned with? And in this case, the answer is no. Clarifying questions. Anybody have a clarifying question you want to put in the chat?
What were their profits and revenues T3 years?
Okay, what else?
What time frame are they expecting to increase revenue in?
Good. Anything else?
Why is this the goal? What factors are driving this?
Okay.
How many competitors? What is their market share? What market do they serve?
Okay. That
What-
last one really belongs in the structure. But the others were solid. But any more?
What constitutes success? What are the ways they can do this? And what is their current product mix and percentage of revenue for each?
Okay. That last question belongs in the structure. All right, so good. Those were great questions. So I just had a couple. How much did revenues increase by last year? We know he wants to increase revenues by 25%. What did we do last year? Last year, we only did 10%. And we thought, that was good. We had a successful Have a Cow marketing campaign, which was the reason for that. And also, what kind of time frame are we looking at? He wants it in 1 year. So, holy cow. We may have to do some reality testing at some point because this seems pretty aggressive, but let's see what happens. All right, oops. So take a minute, draw out your structure. I'll give you 90 seconds. It's your last structure of the evening. Okay, let me show you what I got. So this was my structure. This is what some notes would look like. So Cal Brothers, I want to know the brand, the product mix, the distribution channels that we're using right now, and also production capacity. With the market, I want to know the size of the market, the growth rate, the major players, market share, and industry drivers. With growth, we know that revenues equal price times volume. So one way we can increase growth is increase the price. We can increase volumes. We can increase channels. We can increase the product mix, possibly acquire a smaller player, do a marketing campaign, maybe bring in some seasonal balance. These are all things that we can look at as we go through. All right. Cal Brothers. So I'm going to give you some information on Cal Brothers. They have a strong brand, much like Ben & Jerry's. Their product mix, super premium ice cream, 30 flavors, 1-pint containers, single serving on a stick, 5 low-fat ice cream, 10 flavors, 1-pint container, all natural ingredients. Channels, weak in the Southwest. Supermarkets make up 70% of our revenues, convenience stores 5%, franchises 15%, and we have franchises that we also have 30 company-owned stores that bring in 10%, and our production capacity is 65%. I can also tell you that, well, I'll tell you this in a minute. All right, so that tells us about Cal Brothers. About the market, remember we asked about market size, growth rate, major players, industry drivers. Cal Brothers has 8% market share. So how big is the premium ice cream market? Put it in the chat. Courtney, give me a shout out when someone comes up with that. I see a lot of people just kind
Around
of
1 billion?
Nope.
Around 2.5 billion? Just over 2 billion? A little under 2? 2.4?
2.5. So we're going to take, so we know 200 million equals 8%. So 8 over 100 equals 200 over X. All right, so you got 20,000 divided by 8 equals 2.5 billion. Now, one of the things they'll look for is for you to pick up on the fact that if they hit their goal, their market share is actually going to increase from 8% to 10%, right? Because they want 250 million in revenue, and that's going to be basically 10%. So depending on how much the market grows, it might be a little less than 10%, but just based on these numbers, that's something to think about. All right. So market size, 2.5 billion, growth rate for the industry was 12% last year. So Cal Brothers wants to basically double what the industry is doing. So again, we need to be thinking maybe a little reality testing might be good, but not yet. Major players, Haagen-Dazs, Ben & Jerry's, industry drivers, brand, price, and quality. All right, so then we talked about growth, right? These are the things that we wrote down about growth. So what can we do? Does anybody have any ideas? Throw out some ideas in the chat. See what you come up with. Try to be creative and not not just the usual suspects because we only have a short period of time. So I want something that's a little different.
Increase production, innovation, new non-dairy ice cream,
Okay.
development of a creative loyalty program, strengthen Southwest market, offer more diverse product mix.
All
What
right,
is,
good. Those are all
what is
good.
your financial position? Acquiring a smaller player would be attractive as we are not concerned with profit.
All right. All right. So can we increase our price? No. All the major brands are basically priced the same. So how do we increase volume? We can increase our distribution channels. And we can do that a couple ways, right? We can acquire a smaller regional player. That would increase our distribution channels. Product mix. We can increase our product mix. So there was a Harvard professor years ago called Ted Levitt, and he wrote a famous Harvard Business Review article called Marketing Myopia. And basically he said that there was a company that made buggy whips back in the early 1900s. And then cars came along and the market for buggy whips went down. If they had taken a step back and thought of themselves as being in the transportation business and not the buggy whip business, they'd still be in business today, possibly. So maybe if they made windshield wipers. So we're going to take that. If Cal Brothers take a step back and says to themselves, we're not just in the premium ice cream business, we're in the dairy business, then a lot opens up to them. And we want to incorporate seasonal balance in that, right? So ice cream, people buy when it's hot out. Sales, go down during the winter. So what if we came out with gourmet cream cheeses? What if we came out with 5 or 10 different flavors of gourmet cream cheeses? We can have those in the supermarkets. That's different. They'll carry those. Because if we come out with more flavors, that's not going to be helpful. Because if you go to the store and you look at Ben and Jerry's, you're only going to see like 5 or 6 flavors, right? They get rotated in and out. So where do they sell all those other 30 flavors? So we need something that the supermarkets are going to bring in and give us space for. So cream cheeses would be one idea. We could also sell cream cheeses at all the bagel shops and coffee shops. And we can also come out with a 2-pint container of our products. That would be something different. They're not going to take any more 1-pint containers, but 2-pint containers. That's a little different. Maybe we can get some of those, some shelf space for those. All right, we're also going to acquire a smaller regional player, and we're going to do another Have a Cow marketing campaign, Have a Cow too, sort of thing. All right. So how do we get to 50 million? Marketing campaign, we're going to assume we'll bring in another 10. If we buy a small player that has 1% of the market and the players in the Southwest region, that will bring in 25 million. We'll take advantage of the synergies, production, supply chain, distribution, back of the house sort of stuff. Product mix, we're going to bring in ice cream in 2-pint containers. We're going to bring in cream cheeses, which will increase our product mix, increase our distribution channels. Other things we can do is we can sell more franchises because one, they pay a franchise fee, plus they buy all the products from us, all the product mix from us, and we get some of that money up front. And we can also figure out, it will also increase our overall increased distribution channels. Okay. So I want you to take a minute and write out your recommendation. Assume that the CEO just walked in, Winston Cow, we're gonna give him our recommendation. Anybody want to do it live? Anybody want to
Can I,
unmute
can I?
themselves? Yep.
Yes, I'll go. I think we can introduce new products. It's been already mentioned, but I don't think we should be limiting ourselves to the same old products. We could maybe do a sample size in a small market and then figure out which ones are selling fast and increase production based on those results. And then maybe increase the selling points as well. Uh, those are the ones I came up with.
Okay. All right. That was a good first shot. Remember, we want to bring in risks and next steps. And also, when you lead off with the recommendation, you want to be definitive. So yes, they should, not yes, I think they should, or whatever whatever the thing is. So here's my recommendation. We can reach our goal by increasing revenues by 25% by focusing on three things: increasing our distribution channels, changing our product mix, and a major marketing campaign. The distribution plans includes acquiring a small player, selling more franchises, and by incorporating a seasonal balance plan, which is part of the product mix, will be expanded by changing container size and coming out with a line of gourmet premium ice creams, which would also increase our distribution channels, and running a national marketing campaign. The risks involve: one, the acceptance of the new products and the cannibalization of the old ones, and two, competitive response. There's a small chance that they will follow us in the cream cheese, and I see that both of these risks are relatively low. Next steps include looking for a company to buy and designing new products. So something along those lines. That was a good first shot at your recommendation. So, and thanks for being very brave to do that. All right. Case evaluation form. There are basically 12 things that they look for. There are 12 things on here. You can either get a 1 or a 0, a 1 or a 2 for a total score of 24. If you can get a 20 or above, you're sitting in good shape. Analytics framework is by far the most important thing. The quant is your math. Did you have problems with zeros? Did you quantify related numbers as percentages? Could you figure out return on investment, break even, market size? Also, good use of data provided when they slide those or email those charts to you. Are you able to look at them, analyze them, and extract what's important? Under communication, all the usual suspects plus note layout. They take notes very seriously, as should you. Personal enthusiasm. They love it. People who love solving problems, people who can't wait to like sink their teeth through this thing and rip it apart and figure it out. Self-confidence. All right, you're 6 months out of school. You're sitting in front of a line manager who's old enough to be your father, and you just told him he's been doing things wrong for the last 5 years. You think he's going to be happy with you? No, he's going to be in your face and down your throat. And we want to make sure that you can defend your answer without getting defensive, make a persuasive argument while keeping confidence high. Everybody gets beat up in these cases. It's the nature of the beast. Your confidence level is going to drop like a stone. What they're looking for is recovery time. How fast you get your, do you get your self-confidence level back up to where it was before you got into trouble? And then finally, use these cases as a showcase for your talents. All right, your logic, your original thought, your intellectual curiosity, your intellectual horsepower, your creativity. This last one is where you're going to separate yourself from everybody else. We figure everyone else can do the 11 in front of this, but coming up with original ideas and solutions, that's what's going to make you stand out. Finally, let's talk about some math, everybody's favorite subject. This is the math you're most likely to see. Percentages, break-evens, weighted averages, net present value. All right, so Coors is thinking about getting into bottled water because their beer is made with Rocky Mountain Spring bottled water. The bottled water market was $18 billion last year. It's going to grow 5% a year every year for the next 5 years. What's it going to be 5 years from now? So when I gave that case live, people would figure out 5% of 18 billion and then 5% of that new number and then 5% of that new number and then 5%. No one wants to sit there and watch you do the same calculation 2, 3, 4, 5 times. They're looking for you to take shortcuts. Remember in the beginning, I said they make you do math without a calculator for 2 reasons: to see how you think and to see if you think. So you would basically say, all right, it's going to grow 5% a year for the next 5 years. That's 25%, but we need to take compounding into consideration. So we know it's going to be more than 25, but less than 30. My best guess is about 28%. So we're going to multiply 18 times 1.28, or even 18 times 1.3, and then shave a little off the answer. But the biggest math mistake I see, and the one that's going to hurt you the most, is when you're off by a 0, you don't realize it, you say it, and it doesn't make any sense at all. And even if you say it and you kind of reach and try to grab it back, you're still going to lose some points for it. So remember my rule of thumb: ask yourself, does this number make sense before you say it? And then there's a thing called private math and public math. Private math, you're at home, you're doing your math, you got a calculator, all's right with the world. Public math, you got somebody sitting 2 feet away from you watching every digit you write down. So when you do your math, whether it's across from someone or over Zoom, you want to tell them what you're going to do. Then you're going to fill in the numbers. Then you're going to do the calculations. Because if you go off and you do the math and come back and say the answer is 400 million, and I say, no, it's not, we don't know where you made the mistake. But if you do it and basically walk them through it and you make a mistake, they're just going to say, you know what, Austin, that number seems a bit high. Or you may want to revisit that number, you fix it, and you move on. And then finally, ways to prepare. I'd love it if you read Case in Point. There's actually 4 case in points, but Case in Point 11 is all about case interview prep. Make a journal, okay? With every case you do, write down what the issue was, what the solution was, but more importantly, what you didn't think about. You can read and practice cases in other books. In Case in Point 11, I think there's like 35 cases in there. A lot of MBA programs put out a case book. The 2 best I've seen is University of Michigan and London Business School. And you can usually find those floating around, older editions floating around the internet. Online practice. If you like the videos, I have a thing called the Video Vault. I also have a thing called CQI, which has a lot of math in it, as case starts, market sizing. There's a ton of information on that. But you can also go to the McKinsey, Bain, and BCG websites and do cases. They provide you some information so that you can do cases there. But nothing beats live practice. So form groups, hit up alumni, career services. And at casequestions.com, my site, if you go across the top, you'll see a thing called the Exchange, which will allow you to do cases with students from other schools. Last year, we had over 900 MBAs from around the world sign up. And it's going to ask you, what school you're from and what level you are. Are you new to this? Or have you done 30 cases? Are you willing to give cases, or you just want to receive cases? So go in there. The value of that is that when you do a case with a student from another, they don't have to be nice to you. Your classmates are going to be too nice because they have to live with you until graduation. You want someone who's going to be brutally honest. These guys are never going to see you again. They don't care. They're going to rip you a new one. And the other advantage is that you're not going to be interviewing with your classmates. You're going to interview with strangers. So you got to get used to interviewing with strangers. All right. Questions? I know that was a lot of material for tonight. And I know you had a long day, but you have the handouts, and most of this is in the book as well. Final questions? All right, so I'm going to leave you with what I started with, and that is your job search is more important than your classes. Don't tell the dean I said that. I want to be invited back. Okay. Put the time and the effort into this. These are life-changing jobs that you're going to be applying for. These consulting firm jobs, and you only get one bite of the apple per year. And I've seen so many students waste good opportunities because they didn't put the time and the effort into it. It's worth it. And it's also the first hurdle that they put you through. So their mindset is, if you're not willing to put the time and effort and to learn how to do this, then you don't want the job. So they know it's a big commitment. That's a big reason why they're doing it. So, and I was at another school last year, a couple years ago, and I said, your job search is more important than your classes. I didn't realize the dean was lurking in the corner, and as soon as I said that, he came strolling out. He put his hand on my shoulder. Actually, it was more around my neck, and he said, you know what? Mark is right. There's a reason they called it B school. You only need a B to graduate. You should be doing other things besides academics. You should be networking with your classmates. They're going to be your contacts throughout the rest of your career. You should be networking with alumni. You should be doing everything you can to get a job. It's the big reason, I would imagine it's a big reason why you came to business school in the first place. So don't tell the dean I said that B school thing. Deans react differently. So have fun with this, learn a lot, enjoy your next 2 years, and if you can do a case competition, jump on it and embrace it, because it's a wonderful time in your life. Thanks for coming out tonight. I know you had other things to do, and I know it's late there. You had a long day, and I appreciate you hanging out with me. Thanks a lot.